All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for Murox ASP.NET 4.6 with C# 2015 6th edition for the AWD1100 ASP.NET, 1111 ASP.NET with Web Databases class. We're in the middle of Chapter 14 of 25, and I'm on page 504 in your text, talking about how to update grid view data. And to do that, so the grid view control has the ability to update data in the underlying data source with little code. You must set the configure data source with update, delete, and insert statements as described in the last chapter. Okay? When we do this, we work with command fields. This is the fields dialog box that you use for working with command fields. A command field allows you to add buttons. You can allow either one button that'll handle everything, or typically you'll have multiple buttons, one for edit, one for delete, one for select. Now, by its very nature, by default, the grid view doesn't allow an insert. You can change that, and we'll do that in the next application, in the next lesson, in the next video in just a little bit. So, a command field is a grid view column that contains one or more command buttons. In the figure here, you can see 5 of the command buttons you can include in each row of a grid view control. The update and cancel are displayed only when you click the edit button. You can't display these as separate command fields. When you click a delete button, the grid view calls the source control's delete method, which deletes the selected row from the underlying database. Then the grid view will automatically redisplay the data without that deleted row. When you click the edit button, the grid view places you in edit mode, where it shows you both the update and the cancel buttons. We talked about those previously. The select button, if chosen, lets the user select a row. Then the selected row is displayed with whatever settings you have in the selected row element. All right. The 2 tables that are shown in this figure show the properties. That's the tables that are here and here. All right. So they show the properties of a command field element. Button type specifies the type of button displayed in the command field. The valid options are button, link, or image. Normally it's done as a button. Causes validation specifies whether validation should be performed if the user clicks a button. So you might want to specify that, all right, if you're going to update something, for example. And validation group specifies the name of the group to be validated if causes validation is set to true. The properties that show buttons and set the text or images they display. As mentioned here, we've got cancel, and you can see the buttons, what the buttons show and what the text is. Delete, edit, select, and update. Again, the command field provides for an insert button, but the grid view control itself doesn't directly support an insert operation. Now, here is where we have to start talking about where you might want to add some of your own code. It's not a lot of code. It's shown here. But you might want to add some. You'll notice that in many of these, for delete, for edit, and for update, there is a deleted and a deleting. There is an edit, there is an updated and an updating, etc. Now with those, the difference between these, it's not just the tense, if you know anything about English, but in the deleted, if you put code in the row deleted event, it's already happened. So there you might want to check to see if you were expecting a row to be removed, for example, that indeed it was removed. In the one that's in the present tense, deleting, it has not happened yet. So, the grid view control provides many features, but you still might write some code if you want to do things like data validation, database exceptions, and concurrency errors. The most common reason to handle the before action, which is the deleting or editing or updating, is to provide data validation. For instance, if the user clicks the update button, you can handle the row updating event to make sure, for instance, if they were supposed to add a unit price, that they actually entered a value and the value was numeric. The after events, so the ones that end with ed, so deleted, updated, etc., they give you the opportunity to make sure that the database operation completed successfully. In most of those situations, you should test for two conditions. You should check for any database exceptions that might have been thrown by checking the exception property, and that's what we're doing there. Also, if you're using optimistic concurrency, you should check to see if the affected rows was 0. And if that's the case, you might have an optimistic concurrency set up where two people were trying to update at the same time. When you update a row, one of the most common exceptions is caused by an attempt to store a null value in a database column that doesn't allow nulls. This occurs when the user doesn't enter a value in one of the columns being updated. Another event that you might want to add code in is the row data bound event, which occurs when a row is bound to a grid view control. This event is commonly used to format a cell based on the cell's value. For example, if this value of the cell is less than 0, you might give it a different color. You may have seen this before. For negative numbers, they might be in parentheses, they might be red, or both. Now, as far as inserting rows into a grid view, and this is 508 and 509 in the book, the author says, you may have noticed that although the grid view lets you update and delete views, it has no automatic provision for new row insertion. When you use the grid view along with a form view or a details view, which we talk about in future chapters, you can provide for insert operations with minimum code. That'll be again in Chapter 15. Another way you can do this is by what's shown next. So you must create a set of input controls with things like text boxes where you can literally go in and add the information in. Then you must provide a button that the user can click to do the insertion. Then in the click event, you can set an insert parameter. It sounds like a lot of work, but it's not terrible. All right, so you've got the insert method right there that executes the insert command defined for the data source. You've got insert command, which is the command to be executed, and insert parameters, which has the parameter with a specified name, and default, so if you don't provide anything, the default parameter. So again, remember that by default, the grid view control does not support insert operations. All right, but you can use the data source to insert rows if you want to. To provide for inserts, the page should include controls like text boxes. To use an SQL data source control to insert a database row, first set the default value property for each parameter, then call the insert method. Remember, the insert method may throw an SQL exception or an SQL error for things like a primary key constraint. All right? So the second example that's in here is this category maintenance. So we had the first thing with the categories back here. Come on. All right, where we had all of our information. This was our product list. But now we want to be able to maintain categories. Please be cognizant or remember the fact there are currently only 4 categories: costumes, special effects, masks, and props. This shows all of them. We can do edits and deletes, but we can't add a new one. So here we've added, remember there's only 3 fields, the ID, the short name, and the long name. Doing it like this, as opposed to using a form view or a detail view that's shown inside in Chapter 15, works well when you only have a few fields like this. All right, so we've got 3 different things in here. So in other words, in here, and what I'll do is I'll come in, okay, so if I come in and I click Edit here, under Masks, Edit. We talked about this before. So if I click Edit, it says the site can't be reached. Not a good thing. Localhost refused to connect. Not sure why that would have happened. I might have to update that database because I had to update the previous one in the previous example. But the point is, I could come in here and put in a new ID. So let's say I wanted to have, I don't know, Deck. Short name, Decorations. Long name, Decorations. All right, I'm going to get probably another error message, but if I add the new category, like I said, I very well might get an error message. Yeah, the same thing. But what will happen after I do that, and I'll fix it, is down in here, it'll now show decorations here, here, and here. And if I click on any of these, the edit, and it'll have edit and delete buttons, and the update will come up. All right? So this category maintenance application uses a grid view to let the user update or delete rows in the categories table. So again, I would have to come back in here and do my updating of the database. Okay? And I've got to remember how to do that. So I'll see if I can do that and get that fixed by the next iteration of that. But let's quickly talk about the code that's in here, and then we'll put this chapter to rest. So part 1 of this shows the grid view control. Again, this is shown on page 512 and 513 in the book. It specifies that the data source is SQL data source 1, and the primary key is the category ID. Part 2 shows the SQL data source control. It includes conflict detection and old values parameter format string. The conflict detection indicates how update and delete operations are handled. By default, it's set to compare all values, which means that you'll do optimistic concurrency. The old values parameter format string indicates the format of the parameter names used to hold the original column values. Finally, the last part of this shows the input controls to enter the data for a new category. So the grid view control is bound to the SQL data source 1 data source. The columns element includes child elements that define the 5 columns. There are the bound, 3 are for the bound fields and 2 are for the command buttons. The select statement retrieves all the rows in the categories table. The where clauses in the delete and the update provide for the optimistic concurrency. The text boxes are used to enter new data for a row, and the required field validators are used to ensure that the user enters data for each column of a new row. All right, when I come back, we'll talk a little bit about the code behind file, which is shown here. And I guess we could talk about it right now. All right. You could do this without writing any code, but you must still write code to insert, to do the insert to catch any database or concurrency errors that may occur. All right. So we've got 4 event handlers in here. The first one in this pre-render that you see right here, it works like what we've seen earlier in the chapter. All right, this is going to set up your header and footer so that we're able to use the bootstrap. All right, the second event in the add starts by checking to see if the data is valid. If it is, it sets the values of the 3 insert parameters, and then it calls the insert method and it checks to make sure that an exception was not thrown. All right. The third event, which is in the updated, is called after a row has been updated. Again, it checks the exception property to see if an exception has been thrown. If one has been, the database error message method is called to display the associated error message. Finally, the last one in the deleted is called when a row has been deleted. Okay, like the update, it checks to see if an exception has been thrown or if a concurrency error has occurred. The only difference here is this method doesn't set the keep and edit mode property to true, because that doesn't make sense for that particular one. All right, so the only thing that's left is the last 2, 4, 6 pages of the chapter. Really, I guess the last 4 pages that talk about template fields. So I'll be back to discuss that one shortly.